Hello, and welcome to Leaderfolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sara. Before we jump into our conversation today, it feels imperative to mention the recent killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and George Floyd. These heartbreaking and repugnant examples of the pervasive racism in our country have sparked protests nationwide. And although Leaderfolk is not a news podcast, our mission to elevate and amplify the voices of marginalized leaders in the Jewish community and our obligations as Jews to seek justice and tikkun olam means that we have a responsibility to clearly and strongly stand by the Black community and to say out loud that Black lives matter. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Stephanie Goldfarb. She is joining us from Chicago, where she is the Director of Community Engagement for Honeymoon Israel. She has a background as a clinical social worker and is an educator at heart. Stephanie is also a nationally recognized chef, having appeared on several nationally syndicated cooking shows, including a winning turn on America's Best Cook. Stephanie, we're so grateful to have you with us today. I know that there's a lot going on in the world and that it is different and probably more challenging to focus in on elevating your work in the Jewish community, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to talk with you and to do exactly that.
I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I love to start with my guests and just ask, what is your Jewish journey? Where did you come from and how did you get to where you are now?
Oh God, how much time do we have?
As much as you want.
So I grew up Reform Jewish in Scottsdale, Arizona, which to many people's surprises is like a super Jewy area of Arizona. And I grew up like going to Hebrew school and summer camp and all that kind of stuff, but really didn't know much about Judaism as a practice, as a religion, as a source of strength, potential strength in my life. I was sort of in it for the friends, and it sort of like I think that's like a very regular way of describing like an assimilated sort of secular Jewish experience. But I always loved Jewish spaces, and I was in a lot of them as a young person. And when I moved from Arizona to Chicago, I was lucky enough to be absorbed into the Mishkan Chicago community, which is a post-denominational Jewish space that's led by the incredible Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann. And Rabbi Lizzie, I really credit her and the space that she curated at Mishkan with changing and elevating my relationship with Judaism. And the way that she did that was really just by like putting it in my hands and making a radically welcoming environment for me to participate in. And not just me, of course, but the hundreds and hundreds of other people in our community who really find Mishkan to be a really just radically welcoming and accepting space for people who come from lots of different knowledge backgrounds. And subsequently, I, like right out of college, got a job at the Jewish Federation of Chicago. That was my first job. And I actually hated my first job. I didn't hate it. I wasn't good at my first job, but I realized in that job that I wanted to be working professionally in a Jewish space. So after finishing grad school with my master's in clinical social work, I went right back to the Federation world into a job that I loved, which was helping to run an 8-year stint at the Teen Initiatives Department at the Jewish Federation of Chicago, where I was running some like really shockingly radical programs for a Federation landscape. I was running like Jewish feminist programs for high school students to do justice. And it was awesome. All the while really gaining some like serious Jewish chops, like as an educator and just like as a knowledgeable Jew through Mishkan and a variety of other opportunities like the Schusterman ROI Fellowship, a stint at Yeshiva University, where I completed a certificate in experiential Jewish education. I put myself in a lot of positions and like opportunities that like felt really uncomfortable to me. And I'm still really on the journey toward my own Jewish learning, but I see myself as an informal Jewish educator. And the reason why I'm good at my job is because I know what it's like not to know stuff. Like I know what it's like to be in a Jewish environment and to feel like a hack or to feel like an imposter. And I take that work really seriously.
It sounds like that experience really lends itself to the position that you have now with Honeymoon Israel, which I'd love for you to explain a little bit, but I imagine that dealing with intersectional couples, interfaith couples, in your work at Honeymoon Israel, and having felt like an imposter in Jewish spaces as a Jew yourself, I think that must be a really valuable experience to be able to offer to the couples that you work with.
Yeah, you're totally hit the nail on the head. And also, I'm an alum of HMI, of Honeymoon Israel. My partner and I participated on the very first trip from Chicago, so I can also see from the perspective of somebody who needs this kind of community. What kinds of programs and opportunities are useful. So let me tell you a little bit about Honeymoon Israel. So we are a national organization, and prior to COVID, we were running trips, multiple trips every single month to Israel for couples who are early on in their life stage. So we're talking about people who are dating, people who are engaged, married couples, people with kids, people without kids, ages like 25 to 40 or so. And we see Israel as this incredible classroom for people to come together in community. Specifically, we take people from communities in their own city. So I'm the director for Chicago, but we run trips in, I think it's like 21 cities at this point. I kind of lost track. So every year, several times a year, I take a group of 20 couples with me from Chicago to Israel. And my goal is twofold. It's number one, to expose these couples to everyone and everything in that land, so that they can start to form their own authentic relationships and start to ask their own authentic questions about what's happening in that place and what has happened in that place. And number two is to give our couples the opportunity in a really warm and supportive environment to either begin or continue conversations around what it means to have a Jewish family. And we definitely don't mean that like in terms of having children. Like Honeymoon Israel doesn't care if our couples have children or not. Families can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. But the reason why this is a really important thing that, to do is because we're specifically working with couples who are interfaith, who are queer, who are people of color, who have largely like very little Jewish knowledge and very, very insecure Jewish confidence. I would describe it like that. And we're bringing them together as a community where they can build Jewish community together. And we're sort of redefining what it means to be a Jewish family. And widening the Jewish tent in a really serious way, because for many of our couples, mainstream Jewish communities have either been overtly or covertly unaccepting or unwelcoming to them for a variety of reasons. And Honeymoon Israel has profound respect for all of our couples' relationships, for all of their lived experiences. This is not a program designed to get people to fall in love with Israel by any means. In fact, we really call this a questions trip rather than an answers trip, meaning if anybody's walking away with like answers about Israel, that like we've done something wrong. This is an environment where people are really tasked with asking challenging questions and having challenging conversations about Israel. And also an environment where people can start to dip their toes into like making meaning of Judaism for themselves as people and as couples, and as a community. And then we take them back to, in my example, we take them back to Chicago. And the real bulk of my work is nurturing those communities once they come back with ongoing opportunities to engage, whether it's Friday night Shabbat dinners or, most recently we had a Shavuot, like an all-night Shavuot learning experience. And this is with people who, like, many of whom had never even heard of Shavuot before. So it's making accessible what feels to some people like, it's making accessible to some people what feels intimidating, and what feels sort of gatekeepy, and helping people to see that Judaism belongs to all of them, whether or not they were born Jewish. And my philosophy is like, if you've cast your lot with the Jewish people, then all of it belongs to you too. And, finding really interesting experiential ways of helping people to engage with what already belongs to them.
I'm really interested by this idea that you bring up about kind of gatekeeping in the Jewish community. And I was taking notes as you were talking. And before you even got there, I wrote gatekeeping. Um, I'm curious from your perspective, how can the Jewish community, whether that's lay people, lay leaders, other Jewish leaders, how can they take a page out of the Honeymoon Israel kind of handbook to support these couples who might feel the pressure of these kind of unspoken or invisible barriers to their participation?
So, Sarah, that's a really good question. I would say that for people who are working in organizations that have a hard time accessing or marketing to interfaith couples, to queer couples, to people of color, to young people in general, I would say take a look at who is in your leadership. And if they're not representative of the people that you want to, that you want to do outreach to, then, widen your tent first. And I would also say that it's about meeting people exactly where they are and really expressing profound respect for who they are and, not seeing, specific communities of people as needing something from you, but rather seeing them as assets to a larger Jewish community. The biggest part of my job is thinking of ways to elevate the voices and talents and gifts of our own community members to teach their own Torah, to contribute to their own emerging Jewish community, and to be creative about what that looks like. So it's really a radical inclusivity that that doesn't depend on stagnant ideas of what Judaism should look like. It's something that we play with, and it's something that we, and by we I mean Honeymoon Israel, it's something that we're really inspired by, is like the Judaism of our couples and how they're choosing to make Jewish decisions as couples. That's where I draw a lot of my own inspiration from when it comes to programming and my approaches with them. And I would say the third thing is really just to listen. Listen to what people are interested in, listen to what people are needing, and be flexible. And, if you can be nimble and able to pivot and try new things, and ideally advance people into leadership opportunities. One of my approaches in the work I do is I always say my goal is to put myself out of business as a facilitator as quickly and as efficiently as possible, which means, really finding ways to call in the lived experiences and talents of our own alums, of our own participants to make our work really come alive.
That sounds really great and inspiring. And I love thinking about a future for the Jewish community that does center any variety and innumerable ways that a person can live a Jewish life.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think, experiential Jewish education is where it's at. The folks I work with, they're not going to sit and study text all day every day. It's not going to work, and it's not going to be relatable. But finding a way to take elements of text or finding a way to take elements of tradition and, helping people to understand how it's already a part of their lives, how they're already making, Jewish decisions, how they're already participating in justice, and, and then thinking about how to elevate it and how to access new sources and how to access new opportunities. It's, it's coming from a strength-based perspective. And I'll also just add that one of the things that was done for me is really what I try to do for others. Is Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann, the reason why I was so comfortable at Mishkan is because she saw in me the potential as a leader in the community, even though I felt like I didn't know anything. And within a couple of weeks of being in the community, of going to Shabbat services, she called me up on the phone and asked me if I would lead a session on something, if I would lead a workshop on something that I knew about. And that made me feel immediately like I had ownership over the space and that the space belonged to me. And that's exactly the kind of model that I try to have in my community here in Chicago.
That's so beautiful. Another thing about your background that I'm really fascinated by is that you have this background in social work. And so you have a much more, I guess, quantitative or scientific background in how to deal with people as human beings than many of us in the Jewish leadership space. And I'm curious about how that background informs your work.
That's a great question. So what I'll say is that everybody needs to be held. Everybody, no matter what age you are, you need to be held. And, this isn't from necessarily my social work background, but from my background of working with young people, is learning how to hold people. And I find that actually adults need the same amount of holding that young people do, sometimes even more. Because the older you grow, the more lived experiences you have, the more challenges you've had. And especially if you're in a relationship with somebody who comes from a different background than you, where you're trying to fuse, two lives together, it can often be so challenging, and so real. And having somebody in your life, or having an organization in your life like Honeymoon Israel to provide a container for people to arrive as full human beings, with respect, is something I think everybody needs. And I think that's like a pretty social worky background, but the social work that I practice is informed by intersectional feminism, and it's informed by systems theory. So I'm always interested in knowing people, as you said, sort of as like full human beings, and thinking about people's sexuality and race and age and, family dynamics and really seeing people, for the big picture of who they are, and facilitating conversations in a way that's really embracing and respectful of those experiences. And I think that what that does is it helps people to feel held, and it helps people to trust the space. And this is not just my approach. This is really a Honeymoon Israel approach. And that's why our brand is so trusted. It's so, so, so trusted. We also, what I'll say is that by being able to give people this experiential opportunity of this like 10-day trip in Israel, where they're not looking at their phones, they're out of their element, they're really only with each other. People are, when you're out of your elements, you can often be a little bit more vulnerable, and take more risks. And that's sort of my like convoluted answer to your question.
Yeah, that's great. I've been listening to other podcasts lately about habit formation and how much easier it is to build habits when other things are also in flux. And so I think that what you're touching on is exactly right, that when you are kind of outside of your comfort zone, it's easier to start becoming more mentally flexible in other ways as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that you just articulated it so perfectly. It's almost like giving people an opportunity to practice something in a safe environment. Like Judaism, you could be born Jewish and like me, go to 9 years of summer camp and be bat mitzvahed and still feel totally intimidated by this tradition and by this heritage and by Hebrew and all of the things that you aren't. And when you're in an environment where you can be held and take risks, you can start to practice, you can start to work out this muscle, and really build a muscle that maybe, never really got a chance to be worked out. It requires a lot of investment. It requires a lot of trust, chutzpah, for people to be able to do that, especially adults.
Definitely. I'm so interested by this supper club that you founded, which is called 7 Species. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I love about it is, at least to my understanding, it exists outside the organizational structure that is so endemic in the Jewish community.
Yes, correct. Yes.
And
oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. I would just love for you to talk about it, because I think it's such a beautiful example of the community of you creating something that feeds back into the community, doing it independently, doing it with an eye towards philanthropy and tzedakah. And I just think that's so cool, and more people should do it.
Well, thanks for thinking I'm cool. This was my way of combining my two passions, which is food and Jewish stuff. So for anybody who's listening and doesn't know, the 7 species are like the holy 7 foods of the Torah. And I named my supper club the 7 Species Supper Club because, it's like a link to food. It's a link to Judaism. Often I cook with the 7 species. I have it tattooed on my arm. And the reason why this felt like a Jewish enterprise to me is because, first of all, I didn't make any money off of it. Not that like making money is like not a Jewish thing to do, but this was a way for me to do tzedakah and to leverage my own talent as a cook in order to raise funds for like lots of really rad nonprofits here in Chicago. Specifically, we were funding organizations that support women, children, and the LGBTQ community. I haven't mentioned yet, but I identify as a queer person. So that was really, really important to me too. And that was like sort of my version of like strategic and thoughtful tzedakah, which is like, yes, I could definitely put money in a tzedakah jar every week, which is something that my partner and I do anyway. But knowing that I had some talent to use to leverage and to nudge people to open their wallets, several times a month, we ended up generating, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, all of which went right out the door to different nonprofits. So I think that, where philanthropy and tzedakah differ is that philanthropy is, it's strategic and it's about leveraging opportunity. And it's about often, getting other people to sign on to your vision. We did that in a really sweet and tasty way.
Do you think that the Chicago Jewish community is special or specially primed, I guess I would say, to kind of accommodate these things that you've mentioned, like Mishkan or 7 species?
Oh, the Chicago Jewish community is so special. We are so lucky to live in this city with an abundance of incredible Jewish leaders. I'll name Rabbi B'nai Lappi. I'll name all the folks at JCUA, Rabbi Megan Goldmarsh, Lizzie Heidemann, Rabbi Dror Chenkin-Gould at Anshe Emet, David Russo at Anshe Emet. Like the list really goes on and on. We just have an abundance of religious, community, social justice, arts, organizations. It's just sort of endless. And we also have a community of people that are incredibly diverse. Chicago is an incredibly political city. And it's a city that has a very rich organizing and advocacy history. And that's very true today. And I would say that our city is, it's primed for a lot of different representations of Jewish life. And I would say that there's something for everybody, like everyone from like queer Jewish punks to, of course, like Orthodox, like black hat folks, and everyone in between, there really is something for everybody. I think the challenge really is how do we stay unified? And there's a quote from Avram Infeld, who's one of the board members of Honeymoon Israel. He asks the question, how can we be unified without being uniform? And I think it's a very good question and one that really resonates with me as a Chicago resident. Because I myself, as a queer Jew, as a Jew with a relationship with Israel, as a feminist, as an intersectional feminist, there's like, just me, like alone as one person, there are spaces in which I feel very comfortable. There are spaces in which I wish I could feel comfortable. There are spaces that I've been kicked out of. There are spaces that I'm trying to build bridges into. It's complex, but it's also very beautiful. And the work that I do really focuses on widening tents and inclusivity. And that's where my energy really lies. And also challenging structural inequities and challenging challenging violence and racism, and it's sort of tough out here, for folks who work in this space in similar spaces as me. There's a lot of good questioning that's constantly being done. There's a lot of anti-bias training that needs to be constantly done, reading and engaging with organizations that are doing really good work that maybe aren't aligned with my own.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up that thread that you just reintroduced about doing this anti-racist work amongst Jews, whether they're leaders or individuals in the community, and kind of restate for the record that we're both white women, Jewish leaders. Our work does not lie exactly in the anti-racist or racial justice sphere, but it's definitely important. It's a conversation that I am passionate about learning more about. And I'm wondering, Stephanie, in your work or from your work with Jews from across many different intersectional identities, do you have any advice on how to broach these conversations with other Jewish leaders who may be pulling away from these conversations or less sure how to have them, how to start them, how to engage with this very difficult topic?
That's a good question. I'll start by saying that, I actually do think that the work that I do with Honeymoon Israel is rooted in anti-racist work. And it's something that as an organization, I actually, just before getting on this call with you, we just had an organization-wide call to talk through our response to the uprisings and the murders that have been happening all over our country at the hands of police. And it's an interesting thing as an organization with the word honeymoon, or with the word Israel in our title, because going to Israel is an inherently political act. That is something that I think needs to be acknowledged. And I'll just speak personally that my relationship with Israel is changing and growing and is complicated day by day, year by year. And I think that it's important to see the work that we do through the lens of anti-racism, because there are many, many, many people who believe that the work that we are doing as an organization is rooted in racism, because we're taking people to the land of Israel, to the state of Israel, and we're not visiting. Well, actually, we have visited East Jerusalem. We absolutely work with Palestinian speakers. We absolutely expose all of our couples to as many voices, as many lived experiences as possible in the short time that we're there. But it's political. It just is. The nature of visiting that place is political, and there is racism in Israel, just like there is anywhere else. Although it has its own unique. It has its own unique sort of monstrous history. So I just wanted to name that and say that the reason why I, as an intersectional feminist, feel really committed to this work is because my approach is to elevate the peace work that is being done in that land, in Israel and Palestine. Because there is so much of it. There is so much good work being done there. And that's the route that I'm choosing to take as somebody who spends quite a lot of time there. So I kind of forgot where we were going on that. And the advice that I was going to give. So the advice that I have to give to people who are interested in furthering their conversation in any number of directions with people who may or may not think like them or feel like them is to always recognize that you're having a conversation with a person, not a politic. That individual people, are by and large good. And most people, I find, especially most Jews, are acting and thinking and reading and speaking from a place of love and wanting peace and protection. And, we think about it all very, very differently. And that, for me, my goal as a Jewish educator and as somebody who is a leader in Jewish community is to think about how we can be unified without being uniform. And this is maybe best illustrated by my very good friendship with my friend Rebecca Kling, who I would recommend you interview. She's a badass. She's a transgender Jew who lives in DC, and she is like, I think she would probably describe herself as like pretty radical left and anti-Zionist. And she and I are very, very close. We work on projects together all the time. We have amazing conversations. We love each other, and we think about things really differently. And we ask each other questions in ways that feel respectful, and like we're actually both really interested in learning from each other, not just in being heard. And what I find when I speak with her is that if I have an opinion that differs from her, she doesn't hate me because of it. She asks me questions because of it, and then respects me. And I could say the same, I think, from her, for her. So that's just like one tiny relationship that I could pluck out of many, but it's possible, and it's healing, and it's important because we're all Jews, and we're tiny. And, you know, just like I could say for the LGBTQ community, like there aren't a lot of us, and it's shitty sometimes being us, and we need each other, even if we don't always like each other. So that's sort of my long-winded explanation.
That's such an atrophying skill, I think, the skill of being able to respectfully and curiously disagree with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Respectfully and curiously disagree while also expressing love. Like, you know, it's one thing to respect somebody on social media and then never really talk with them again, and it's another to have a real life in-person relationship with somebody who you see or talk to on a regular basis. It's I think that's really like the shifting point, is showing up in person, and listening as much as you possibly can, in spaces that don't feel like your own, and being respectful of those spaces and of those people when you're in them, and taking away what you can, and not feeling threatened when something doesn't feel like it belongs to you, or if something feels like it's in defiance of what you stand for or believe, because that's not what's happening. We need each other a whole lot more than that, and the person-to-person connection is a very holy thing, and I think can be stronger and more resilient. What am I trying to say? Like the easy thing to do is to hate somebody because they think differently than you. The hard thing and the more rewarding thing is to embrace somebody because they think differently than you, and to keep showing up in each other's spaces.
Thank you for that. That is such a powerful dose of wisdom and acceptance, and just really incredible advice. And I hope that our listeners really take that to heart, because the Jewish community should be a safe place for Jews who look and practice any number of different ways. And the Jewish community, I think, likes to think of itself as standing up for justice, and there are so many ways in which we are still learning and growing how to step into that place of allyship for other communities as well.
Totally.
So, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so grateful to have had you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate being asked, and I'll just put out there that if anybody is listening to this and like wants to know more of me, you can find me at stephanie@honeymoonisrael.org. If I can ever be supportive in any way, please let me know.
Thank you. I've been asking all of my guests what they're going to do when life starts returning to normal after quarantine has ended. And I'm not sure what your quarantine or your social distancing practices are at this point, but what are you most looking forward to?
See, what I'm most looking forward to, if and when, we get out of quarantine and can, resume a more sort of like in-person social life, I feel like I think I'm really, this is like sort of a common answer, I think, but just seeing my friends, I don't have family here in Chicago. All my family is out west. So my friend group is really my chosen family out here, and just getting to be with them. And also, I'm really looking forward to being in anti-racist spaces in person again, because there is just so much energy in our community right now. And of course, there are uprisings and in-person protests. But for folks who are immunocompromised, it's not possible to participate in that. And I'm really looking forward to being in spaces with people to mourn and to share wisdom and to learn and to be useful. Because, the virtual space is great, and, there's a lot of reading that can be done, and online, anti-bias training, whatever it is. But that's just sort of where my mind is at right now, is being with others who want to be useful. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. Thank you so much again, Stephanie. We're so grateful for your time and your expertise, and be well. Leaderfolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. Leaderfolk is a project of Jewfolk Inc. and the Jewfolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.